Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another one of our live video chats. Today we are speaking with Kelly Allen with Q Strategies, who's going to take us through a little bit about crisis communications. As always, we'll have the Q&A open from the beginning, so if you've got questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in there at any time. We'll circle back to them at the end. Thank you, and welcome, Kelly.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thanks to the Chamber for putting this series together. Really appreciate all the hard work that goes into it, and that you guys are reaching out to all of us in the community, which is awesome. Of course, this is a difficult topic, and I'm really pleased to be here to help some folks out, hopefully, and give some advice. And I know there's the chat is open, so if you have questions as we go along, feel free, and I will take some of them at the end. So I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at Q Strategies, and we're a public relations firm here in town. We deal with a lot of crisis communication. A lot of that's behind the scenes for clients. We also do a lot of workshops and help folks in their crisis communication planning. That is how I prefer my crisis, are far in the future and hypothetical, but we are not in that situation right now. So I'm going to be really specific when we talk about some things that are happening in the community today. When I started working on this, I had a lot of notes, and I was very thinking through about this extended, prolonged crisis that we're in. Now we are also in an immediate crisis, and I hope everybody on the call has safe shelter and has I know so many people have been impacted by the tornadoes, and it has been a very different type of crisis than what we're all going through as the whole world right now. And so there's a lot to cover. I'm not going to try to explain all of those different options, but we're going to go through some of them today. So thanks to everybody for being here. So your crisis communication, what should it be? It should be thoughtful, it should be transparent, and it should be timely. One of the sort of gotcha questions that we get in communication a lot is, what's the first thing that you should do when a crisis happens? And when I ask students this question that I work with, they were always like, write a press release, post an announcement. That's not the right answer. The right answer is ask yourself what has changed. So maybe that's just you and your single business, one person owned business, and it's just you at a table with a notebook saying, what has changed? What do I need to do differently right now because of the crisis that is happening outside? It might be the C-suite deciding, are there policies and procedures? Are there things that need to shift? If we've had a policy in the past that said you couldn't work from home and provide childcare, that's a policy that is not going to be applicable right now. We need to make a change. So before we run out and start saying, we're here to speak to the media, or we've got communication for employees, it's really important to take that moment and to step back and say, like, what are we going to do that is different now than in the past? Right now we're in this extended long crisis, but we're also in a very immediate crisis. And sometimes those things need different kinds of communication and different types of sensitivities. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I just want to say to everybody, I think that it's so easy to get like right here in what's happening and how negative it feels, but there's actually are so many positive stories that are coming out of this. We've all read really positive coverage about people helping each other and how the community is coming together to help tornado victims. There are a lot of things that are happening that are outside of just that immediate panic kind of feeling. So put that aside. Discuss with your team, what are we going to do differently? Do we have changes in safety and precautions? Maybe in the past we encouraged employees to ride together to work. Well, we wouldn't do that anymore. Even if we have employees that still have to keep going to work, we wouldn't encourage ride shares, things like that. Thinking through, are there safety protocols? Are we changing our services, our procedures, our hours? And then once you feel good about the changes that you can make right now, they may change tomorrow, moving forward with your communication. So your employees are just such an important avenue for you to communicate with. they need to hear things first whenever possible. And not just employees, but that can be like if you have members, if you have really frequent customers, if you have a board that you work with, those are audiences that need to hear communication first and foremost from you. Remember that communication can become external really quickly. So if you put something in writing and you send it out to your employees, thinking about that it needs to be those same things, thoughtful, transparent, and timely, that it needs to have a good tone, that it needs to be honest and true. Remember that it could become public. It can easily be forwarded to a media reporter. It can be posted online. Pictures of it can be shared. So thinking about how do we communicate in a way that is both straightforward and effective and gets the message out, but is also kind and thoughtful, and we're thinking about people who are in a crisis mode, because even if your business is not greatly impacted by what's happening, the people who are your customers likely are. And so how do we kind of juggle both of those things? So we've got our policies and procedures, we've got clear ideas about what we need to get out there. Now we're starting to put communication out. And when you do that, you need to think holistically, because right now, before you started communicating, you have this crisis that's happening. You didn't cause it. You don't need to, apologize for things that happen for tornadoes or for COVID. But as you move forward, you may find yourself dealing with an unexpected situation. And that can be things like, there's a large grocery store chain. They don't have any stores here in this area, but they talked about giving all of their employees a $25 grocery credit. And that sounds nice. Everybody gets $25 to help with their grocery bill this week. Except that the story that came out was about the fact that employees don't have paid sick leave. Employees don't have any health insurance. Employees are not able to take time off if they've been exposed, but they're not sick, but they need to quarantine. So you're really discouraging employees from being able to take every precaution, because they aren't going to have any income if they don't go to work. And so now you've got this negative news coverage and people on social media saying, what? Like that, the best that you can do is $25 of groceries, and people are putting their lives in danger to do this really important work that we all depend on. So if you raise your hand and you say, hey, I've got a positive story to share, think holistically about what that story is. If your CEO is getting a big bonus and you're laying a bunch of people off, that's not going to come around as this positive story. So you really want to ask yourself, does a reasonable person look at this communication and see a company that's doing the best that it can, even when times are difficult, and are they kind of on par with what other industries are doing? Does the communication make sense? And is there more that they could do, or does it feel disingenuous? And if our company, if this was a local grocery store that had a handful of employees and was just doing its very best to scrape by, that would be a very different story than a multi-million-dollar corporation, right? So I do want to make that distinction. So if you are able to do something small for the Red Cross right now, that's still a good story, and you should share it on LinkedIn or on your social media and talk about it, even if you've had to lay off employees or make some tough choices as a business. There is a different level of kind of expectation, especially from the media's perspective. So you've talked to your employees, you've gotten communication sent out. Now you've got to think through communicating with your customers, the community at large. And so there's some great ways to do that. Social media, we're seeing a lot of pinned posts where if you're getting a lot of the same questions, you can pin a post with communication to the top of your page, so people will always see that. If they're looking for hours that have changed recently, services that have changed, if they're asking if your toilet paper is back in stock, you can do that. You can also use the automatic response if you're finding that you're overwhelmed with direct messages in Facebook. You can kind of put answers to common questions in an auto response and set that up. It's also a great time to check in with your social media and say who has access to all of our social media channels. And if you're having to make difficult decisions about laying people off, that's something that we see a lot of companies. You don't want to have no access to your social media channels because the one person that had access to them now doesn't work for you. So that's something that a lot of that we see kind of happen over and over again. So check who has admin rights. Remember, an admin can delete you. So be careful about that. In times of fast change, it can be difficult to keep up with. So that's a little side note for everybody. So we're thinking about our communication. We're out there. We've taken precautions to protect our employees. We have maybe a new menu and we have new processes that we're going through. Now what? Do you get to start talking about your sales? When can I kind of get back to a certain kind of normal communication? Is there room for that in a crisis? And that's a question we get really often. What if I'm not, greatly impacted? Can I still do that? Yes, absolutely. That's a way that you can talk about positive news, about positive things that you're doing. Maybe you're featuring employees who are volunteering at the food bank. Maybe it is talking about a sale that you're having. It's totally fine, but you shouldn't connect that sale with your crisis response, right? So your sales code to save 10% is not COVID-19. That would not be the direction that you want to take, right? So you're really thinking through, how do I move to this marketing platform to think about what I can do, how I'm serving the community and my customers right now. And what we're seeing work really well for a lot of folks is that they're using education as a way to enhance their communication. Video, YouTube, Nextdoor, Facebook, Instagram, views on video on all those platforms is going way up, 20, 30, 40%. Nextdoor's traffic is up 70% right now. So if you are a lawn service company and you can give some education that's very local and thoughtful and meaningful to help all those of us who are spending a lot of time in our yards right now, or to take kids on a walking tour about learning about plants, that's not direct crisis communication. You don't have to think about, you're not saying, hey, look at us, we're so great in a crisis, we're offering this amazing service, only choose us, not any of that, but you're offering people something they need, which is educational content in a time where most of us are at home a lot. So if your grandmother has a wonderful sourdough starter, like get her to send you a video chat and talk about it. People love those stories. If you have a plant that is really flourishing in your red clay Tennessee yard, and you have a groundskeeper at your business who will do a little chat with you on social media and a Facebook Live and talk about it, I think all those things are the types of communication that can be really positive for your company. It can really drive traffic, and it doesn't come across as being thoughtless in a crisis. Is a general person on the street going to think this is helpful and good information in a time that's really difficult, and they're using good expertise? And the answer should be yes if you're moving forward with that kind of communication. And then I want to encourage you to stay in your lane when you are communicating. So this really moves into a public relations and media relations kind of like next step. And so I'm just going to talk about it briefly, but if you are right next to a street that was greatly impacted by the tornadoes, you need to be more thoughtful about stepping back from your marketing and communication and sales kinds of things than you would be if maybe you're based in Chattanooga, but you have a lot of customers nationwide who are not immediately impacted. So especially in the first week after something like that, really think about, like, is there a space? There's no space for like humor and funny cat videos and tying what you're doing to a tornado. That's just like a non-starter for all of us. But when we're talking about communication that is tied to this really long crisis that we're in with COVID-19? Is there room on your LinkedIn page to have some humor and to, you might have seen the bingo for calls like this that we're on. How many times has somebody said, oh, I can't hear you, I think you're muted, and you're checking the bingo boxes and employees are playing games and things. Like, there's room for that. There's room for humor and good and positive interaction. What there's not room for, and where you really need to stay in your lane, is giving unsolicited advice to people, making really difficult, you want to share health information that is from a very reliable source. This isn't a place where you would want to start making health claims or talking really wildly about, bringing politics in, all those things. You want to avoid that. We had a situation where a business locally that was sending out messaging to renters, saying, we understand these are really difficult times, but, we still have to pay mortgages and rent is still going to be due. And if they had stopped there, this wouldn't be a story. It wouldn't have gone to the media. Everybody would have said, yeah, we understand, everybody has still got to pay their bills. But they went on to give really specific advice to people to make money by mowing lawns, by donating plasma. They kind of made some wild jumps, and at the end, they said, I do think that their intentions were good to help people find ways to make money, but if you're sick, obviously those options aren't available to you. And so really focusing on what you can do and what you are good at and what your lane is, and thanking our first responders and our healthcare professionals, and not telling people like, well, you should have saved money earlier, or now's a good time to take money out of your 401k, or kind of making these like really broad statements, because those things can, again, taken, those letters were posted online. There was a media story about this company, and he said, we're all in it together. And I think that was the intention, but it came across as really tone deaf, and when people are worried about dying. And so thinking through, again, holistically, where's my lane? What should I stay in? What can I talk about? What am I good at? And if the answer is gardening, then and I'm a yard care company, then talk about those things that are, that make sense for you. So the last one's media relations. In that same scenario, I actually had a client that was in property management who called me and said, hey, we're actually working really hard to find solutions and to be able to offer rent abatement for 3 months for people that have lost their jobs or who might be sick. We'd love to tell that story. And so I was able to reach out to the reporter and make some introductions and connections, and they were able to show another side of folks who were working with their financiers and their commercial real estate owners and all sorts of people to try to juggle all these things, from having food trucks come and park outside their apartment building so people can get hot food, to this rent abatement program. And so, and Second Story was able to get some great coverage about that. So if you have something that you're doing that's interesting, and that's creative, and that there's a bigger story about, especially if there's a national story and you're doing something that's similar or equally helpful, that's a way that you can tweet a reporter, you can email a reporter that has covered similar types of topics. This is not a time to send 20 or 30 reporters an email every time you make a donation or do a good deed, or change a policy or your hours. But if you have a really specific example and good idea and you're willing to talk to the media, especially if you already have a relationship with a reporter, that can still be a really positive opportunity for some communication. And so I just want to wrap up with a couple. We were going to post some links to the Q Strategies website, and we've got some further communication help for crisis communication. The Public Relations Society of America, I'm a member, and they are doing some opportunities and free education for folks that are not members right now, which is awesome. And so we'll link up to some of those things. I think one of the biggest challenges that I hear from people is that they're kind of like waiting for this perfect moment for things to be fine, and then say like everything's fine in their communication. So I just want to encourage you, don't let that need for perfection stand in the way of progress. Like go ahead and put your communication out there. Don't wait for the perfect scenario or to know the answer to every single possible scenario in question. Go back to that. Is it true? Is it transparent? Is it thoughtful? And if the answers to those things are yes, it's okay to move forward with making some public communication. And in just a really practical sense, I love to give a little shout out to Grammarly, which is an online spell and grammar check. So if you're not usually the communication person and you're suddenly in charge of doing a lot of communicating, a thoughtful social media post that has a bunch of spelling or grammar errors in it that's talking about how much we appreciate our first responders, like the tone is still positive, but it's not as impactful. So there's a free version, and it helps you with your writing just from a technical standpoint. So I love to use that. And as well as some resources that we put on our website. So we have a checklist that will help you kind of work through, am I ready to talk to the media or to go out with some public communication? Who's my spokesperson? What are some things that I should think about with key messages? And that's available for free on our site as well. So what questions do I have? 2 questions.
Hey, Kelly. Yeah, absolutely. I think you sort of went over this a little bit. The first one we have from my boss, Sybil Topol. As an organization, let's say there's a nonprofit in town who is in charge of trying to get people to shop at local retailers and restaurants during this time, ones who are offering, takeout or delivery. As you mentioned, we've had a 1-2 punch here, both with the virus and now with the storms. And her question is around timing. What is a good time to launch a campaign like that? It sounds like your advice is, as long as it's thoughtful and transparent, don't wait for some perfect mythical time.
Yeah, I think, I do think that from, we're already in this window, the first 24 hours after the tornadoes, I mean, that would not have been the time to be posting really anything. And there's definitely, we saw some communication coming out that had probably been planned in advance, which was unfortunate. That was very salesy, and it sounded really insensitive to what the community was going through. So you certainly I would really honor like a 72-hour window of thinking about that. But I think that there's also ways, so if you saw the article that came out about Need Loves, they're doing online shopping, and they had a story in the Times Free Press that was about how they put an option for people to buy a loaf of bread and donate it to the community kitchen. They just put it up there. They didn't do anything. They didn't have a campaign, but people, myself included, and the story stood out to me because I had just done it. We're shopping there. I live on the south side, and it was like, oh yeah, will I buy an extra loaf of bread and send it to the community kitchen? I will. And so they were talking about what a great turnout they had for that. And so if you have a story where you're saying these local restaurants are, even though they're struggling and having difficulty, but they're also providing an option for meals for people that have been impacted. I know that there's a caterer in town who's been fundraising to provide free meals to people who've lost their homes. I think that there's still ways to get the stories out about local businesses without necessarily just saying like, it's a fire sale and everything must go. Like we can go back and ask ourselves, like, how are we positioning this? Is there a way that we can work together to maybe make a bigger story than just one person or one restaurant? To Sybil's point, like we're trying to drive traffic to all these different places. But I think, certainly not in the first 24 hours, but we're a couple of days out. I think it's okay to go ahead and launch some of that. People still need to eat and they need to buy groceries. And so.
Sure. We had another question here. You spoke to this a little bit already. Any examples of organizations incorporating humor and or education well during COVID?
Yeah, if you haven't watched it, there's been some trending news coverage for the Cowboy Museum in Texas. I didn't know there was a Cowboy Museum. Um, they put their security guard in charge of their Twitter feed while they were all away, and he's like the cowboy grandpa everybody wished that they had grown up with. He doesn't know anything about social media. He spells out the word hashtag, like he's gone viral. He's posting all of his favorite things about the museum. He's super clever and in this really like dad joke kind of way that's adorable, and also like the positive story we all need in our lives right now. So you can certainly check out like what some folks like that are doing. I think that we've certainly seen locally that a lot of places are tying opportunities that they have right in with the good work that they're doing in the community and how they're partnering to help each other. We've had national news coverage about changing our school lab into a testing site for COVID. We've had people really kind of sharing their fun working from home stories. They've had people turning things over to people unexpectedly, and sharing different perspectives of what's happening. So I definitely think there's a lot of good work being done.
Okay. That sort of leads me into a question I have that I wanted to bring up. You mentioned humor can be dicey. Um, you better be sure that you're really good at it and it's going to land before you put something like that out there, because it can go bad really quickly.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say is the advice about having multiple people sort of check your messaging before you start putting it out there?
Yeah, the first thing I would say to myself is, have I been funny in the past? And if your brand has never been funny in the past, your crisis communication should not be an opportunity to try that on for size. If your brand and your communication has been funny in the past, there's no reason why it couldn't continue to be so. And I think just in general, best practices around humor is that they cannot be, humor should not be at the expense of a particular type of person, and it shouldn't be personal. And so, we can talk about kind of broadly, like we're all sort of dealing with a lot of the same things across the world right now. I saw a picture that had a ban. It's like taken from across the street, of course, but there's a banner hanging out in front that says, "My husband is for sale." There are some funny moments out there. But if you're thinking about, going in a humorous, I got a newsletter last week and it said, "I can't share another picture of the spiky virus. Here is a picture of my dog. This is where I'm at right now." And I think that's great. Like, it doesn't have to be super serious. The dog is like on its back in like an unmade bed and looks like, they're living their best life. All of our dogs are living their best lives right now. So I definitely think there's room for it. I would definitely check with 3 different people on a humor type message, especially if it's a new type of humor or you have any sort of qualms about what you're suggesting. And then if you are finding it within just a small group, you're having to defend or explain a message multiple times, like that should be a non-starter. Try again. And if you are the type of person who just sort of randomly posts things, like that, now is not the time to do that. Like, write it out and save it and then come back the next day and see if you still think that it's funny, and share it with a couple of people first and see like what kind of humor, how it's landing in another audience. And don't pick someone that's a friend of yours. Like, pick someone that would be honest about if they felt like it was offensive or insensitive.
Okay. I think that takes us through all the questions we had. Thank you so much, Kelly. I think this is really useful information for all of our members right now. as I said in some of the posts I put up on this, we've all had a crash course in crisis communication in some form or another over the past few weeks. So getting to actually hear from an expert is, I think, really good for all of us. And we will we will post this after the fact, as we have with all our videos, and we'll include some of those links you mentioned in the show notes, so that people can get access to those resources.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.